When I first played Psychonauts, I was a janitor, which means that it was before I started my IT career, roughly 10 years ago. As soon as it was announced on Fig that they were seeking crowdfunding for the game, I jumped at the opportunity to support it because I had loved Psychonauts when I played it so long ago. I then waited almost 10 years for Psychonauts 2 to be created and released. I followed every single update. Every time that they had a new announcement, I went and checked it out. I watched their YouTube videos, their devlogs, everything that they released. I was always there, sitting down, waiting eagerly to get new information about Psychonauts 2. Now, when I backed the game, I didn't have a lot of money that I could use to throw at it, but I wish that I had. I gave everything that I was able to, which I think amounted to about $40 roughly. So I didn't give all that much money to it, but it does feel good to know that I had a very, very tiny part in making sure that this game came to be. So I'm saying all of this so that you know I have been anticipating Psychonauts 2 for a long time. I came in with high expectations and I have been excited about this game for so long. So to be honest with you, I did come at this game a little bit biased toward it and a little in favor of it. That's why I'm going to be starting with some of the negative things that I have to say about the game before I get into the positives. I just want to make sure I get those out of the way and make sure you know that I'm doing my best to be fair about this game, even though I'm kind of presupposed to have positive thoughts about it. And I do very much like this game. I greatly enjoyed it. There's a lot to love here, but I want to get some of the negatives that I have about the game out of the way, and they're really just about the mechanics of it and a couple of structuring issues. So let's dive into the negative things and then I'll get to the praise. Most of my negative thoughts are just going to be kind of small, and I'm going to start really small with just the snapping, specifically when Raz tries to jump onto a rail or onto a pole. I really don't like the mechanics here. It's one of my least favorite platformer mechanics in general because I think it's very challenging to get it right. You never really know as a player, especially in third-person perspective, if you're actually going to land on what you want to land on or grab what you want to grab. So you expect the character to kind of snap to make up for that, and Raz doesn't snap all that well. He doesn't snap the way that I would like for him to very consistently, and it ultimately made some of the sequences pretty frustrating, especially to do quickly. Mainly jumping from one pole to the next is something that I've always hated, and they definitely did a good job of making those sequences bearable, but it still kind of reminded me of the vine sequences in the Tarzan level of the original Kingdom Hearts game, which is not good. These weren't horrible, but there were some problems with them, and I really didn't like constantly jumping and falling off the edge because I couldn't tell what was a pole that I could grab and what wasn't, and if I was actually aimed correctly in order to grab a pole. It was pretty annoying and challenging to line Raz up sometimes, especially when you're levitating or doing a levitation ball jump somewhere. Really, he just didn't snap as well as I would have liked to, and that's very minor criticism and really just a personal opinion. I'm sure that they did what they could within the bounds of what they wanted to do for this platforming game. It's really just a frustration and a complaint from me. Next, I want to talk about Raz's weight. I'm not trying to shame Raz. I'm sure most of the weight is just his giant head, but Raz felt really heavy to me. I think that he felt heavy in the first game too, although I haven't replayed it in a while, but I kind of want to now that I've beaten the second one. But he just felt really heavy. It didn't feel as light as he should have. Now, this is a decision you can't really go back and just fix because the entire game is built around how high Raz can jump and how quickly he can run. But the character just didn't feel all that fluid and light, and I would have just expected more lightness from a character who is a kid and has all of these psychic abilities. I would have just liked a lighter Raz who could jump a little bit higher, run a little faster. Doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, and I think it's just a design choice. It's just not a design choice that I really liked all that much, but I still enjoyed controlling Raz for the most part. I just would have liked some more fluidity from it. And my third and final complaint is about the story structure. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the story, and I think that it would play out really well as a movie or a book, but when it comes to the video game portion of it, I felt a little bit pigeonholed and was surprised by the third act. I didn't realize the third act was happening, and I didn't realize that the story was ending. In the early parts of the game, probably the first half of it or so, between each of the brains that you jump into, you're kind of encouraged to just explore and run around. You have all these opportunities to collect some items and get more accesses to the world, and I really liked that, returning to this big hub world and exploring that. But once you get about halfway through the game, you stop being encouraged to go exploring, and instead you are almost pigeonholed in the story, and you go from one brain to the next, and then the game is just over, and that was kind of disappointing to me, but I understand why it happened from a story standpoint. It makes sense. It wasn't that the game was rushed, it was more that the game was rushing me to complete it, as opposed to letting me just kind of sit and ruminate in the world once I was done with one level before I carried on to the next one. There wasn't a lot to do in the real world once you'd gotten to the second half of the game. Now you just had to run from one brain to the next, and then I was shocked when the final boss fight happened. I didn't even really get the sort of final level that I really wanted. Instead, the final level was just a very quick, basically run through memory lane, and then you fight the final boss, and then the game ended. Now maybe that's just me wishfully wanting more Psychonauts 2 because I was having so much fun, but I was just shocked that the game ended there. So the story structuring just didn't really give way to exploration and enjoying the hub world in the second half of the game. You pretty much just jumped from one brain to the next until you were done with the game. Now I want to talk about what I loved, which is what I am excited to talk about. Now I have limited myself to just a few things to praise here in Psychonauts 2, but there is a lot more that I could praise than what I'm about to talk about. I could talk about the art direction and the characters, some of the really cool themes that are explored here, the voice acting, which was amazing. So much that I could praise here. Oh, and the music. I could praise the music. There's so much that I could love about this game and that I do love about it, but I'm trying to limit myself to just a few things so I don't end up rambling in this video. And I'm going to start with the accessibility options. I have to stop and praise the accessibility options of Psychonauts 2. They did an incredible job here. There is so much that you can customize about this experience in the event that you are someone who has a few things that you are not able to do when it comes to playing video games. If you're not somebody who has the response times to avoid fall damage, well, you can just turn fall damage off entirely. Or you're somebody who just doesn't have very great reaction times, well, if you want to, you can make Raz invincible. Or you're somebody who just wants to experience the story, isn't all that great at combat, or doesn't enjoy it. You can set up this thing called narrative combat in the game, which gives Raz all of these power boosts that essentially makes him an unstoppable force so that you can streamline combat and get to the parts of the game that you do enjoy, like the exploration and the story and all of that. It's really cool. And that's not even mentioning all of the other accessibility options you have, like being able to change input methods between press and hold, or being able to completely reconfigure the controller scheme if you'd like to. If a new scheme makes more sense to you, you can go in and totally reconfigure the controls. If you remember my video review of Metroid Dread, I mentioned that the controls were a real downside for me in that game. If they'd had some of these same options that we've seen in Psychonauts 2 in Metroid Dread, then I totally would have nixed that complaint because I would have had the option to do things like change the missile button from a hold to a toggle, which is an option that you're presented with in Psychonauts 2, is the ability to change certain things that you normally have to hold to just press, and then it's off, and then you press it again and it's dismissed. That's the way that some of these things should be. You should have those options. And Psychonauts 2 really embraces accessibility and just did an incredible job with it. I cannot praise it enough. I loved seeing some of these options that they have available here. If you don't know, I'm just a big proponent of accessibility in games in general. In fact, one of the main charities that I support is the Able Gamers. I really love that we are working so hard to broaden fan bases and people who can appreciate games and join in on discussions about games. But ultimately, I'm just saying that Psychonauts 2 had some incredible accessibility options. I loved seeing them, and I love the progress that we are making about this in the game development space as a whole. So many accessibility options were presented to us in games this year, and we are only improving with each new release. Now I want to talk about the story. The story of the original Psychonauts game was incredible and emotional and just evoked so many powerful feelings. It was really surprising because when I picked up the game, I'm pretty sure that I got it for free as part of a Humble Bundle, and I didn't really have very high expectations. Then I saw the art style and I was a little bit dismissive of it, but then I enjoyed the game, and then the game got really dark and started exploring some very powerful themes, and it continued to do so throughout Psychonauts. And so I came into Psychonauts 2 expecting the same thing, and I was not disappointed. There was some really grim stuff that was explored even early on in this game, and then later on it really got emotional and started pulling a few tears from me, specifically when I was in, I believe, Bob's head. We were exploring things like alcoholism and escapism, and just that really struck a chord with me personally, and it really got to me. And I got a couple more tears in by the end of the game, but ultimately that was the most powerful scene, was in Bob's head, specifically during the boss fight. There is some narration that happens there that is just really powerful, and the metaphors that are used in these levels are really interesting, and there's a lot that you could explore there. Just some incredible themes. I loved the twists and the turns. I love everything that was displayed to us in the story of Psychonauts 2. He did an incredible job. It totally lives up to the incredible story from Psychonauts. If you loved the story in the first Psychonauts game, you are probably going to love the story in Psychonauts 2 as well. Okay, one more bit of praise that I want to focus on, and that's going to be the powers. We get some old favorites from the first game, but we also explore some new ones in this game that are just so much fun to work with. I don't want to give any spoilers and give away what some of these powers are, but I'll start off with just the mental connection, which is one of the early new powers that you get. This lets you move from one thought to the next, and specifically in the first level, you use it to connect different ideas within somebody's head and change their mind about things. That was very interesting and very well executed, and had some really funny moments to it. If you connect two bits of dialogue that don't really go together, they find a way to make them go together, and then you hear somebody narrate the resulting thought of you connecting those two things. Again, I don't want to spoil it for you, but just if you play Psychonauts 2, toy around with some of those thoughts and connect them in ways that you wouldn't expect, and you're going to see some interesting bits of dialogue. It was very creative on their side, and I spent a lot of time not actually solving the puzzle, but just trying to make sure that I heard every piece of dialogue in those mental connection levels. There are some other awesome abilities that are added here too, but I don't want to spoil things for anybody. My favorite ability in the game is actually the last one that you get, so I really can't spoil it, but it was just so creative and a lot of fun to work with, and also opened up so many new areas in an almost Metroidvania style where I wanted to go back through all the levels and use this ability to get to new locations. That final ability, totally my favorite one, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but just play the game, and when you get that final ability, you'll probably understand why I thought it was so cool. It's just a really awesome concept in general. Before I dive into the next thing that I want to comment on before I get to my overall score, I did want to let you know that you can like, comment, and subscribe all for free in case you somehow didn't know that, and all of those things really help me out as I grow the channel, so I would appreciate your support in that way. And now on to the last thing that I wanted to make a remark on, and that is going to be some of the really cool technical stuff that you find in Psychonauts 2. I know that what I'm about to praise is something that we have seen before in several games, even in the previous Psychonauts games and in games that are older even than that, but I always like it when I see it done well and when it's very seamless, and that is going to be when they would show you the next portion of the level, but it would be in like a sort of portal sense, so it was something that was actually two-dimensional and didn't make sense with the space around it, and it always seemed pretty seamless and was really fun, and in some cases, especially when you're going very quickly, it would be a little bit trippy. There were also some moments of gravity shifting that were really awesome and a lot of fun to play around with, so that was kind of a praise, but more just an acknowledgement of some of the really cool technical stuff that you find in this game, and I just wanted to drop a little compliment to those. So my overall rating for Psychonauts 2, I really want to give this game 5 stars. I am, as I mentioned early in this review, preconditioned to want Psychonauts 2 to get 5 stars. I really wanted this game to be absolutely perfect. The problem is that it's not completely perfect, but it is amazing, and for me, when I get something that's amazing, I give it 4 stars. If you're familiar with my reviews and my review style, you know that 5 stars is something that I am not very keen to give because it's such a high rating and something that I hold in high regard, whereas 3 stars is average. So this was a 4-star game. It was amazing, fun, emotional, definitely jerked a few tears. The story was fantastic, but there were a couple of pitfalls along the way. Nothing too significant and nothing that would make me tell anyone not to play this game. I think that pretty much anybody can play and enjoy this game and find something that they'll connect with in the story. This was really well done, very beautiful, and totally money well spent. I wish that I could go back in time and also have more money so that I could give Psychonauts 2's development a lot more funding than I did back in the day. Psychonauts 2, 4 stars, absolutely fantastic, and I can't wait to see what Tim Schafer does next. He is one of my favorite developers by far. Put him up there with probably American McGee, another one of my favorites. Thank you so much for checking out this review. If you would like to see another game review, I have one for Metroid Dread that I will link up here. And until next time, bye.